You know what a scar is, not as a word, as a specific place on your body with a specific story behind it. The story of what attacked you and did not finish the job. Maybe it is old enough that you have stopped noticing it most days, but if you press on it, something in the skin still remembers. A scar is not damage that never healed. It is the evidence of damage that healed wrong, or healed differently than the surrounding tissue, so that the attack left a permanent mark even after the wound closed. The scar is the memory the body keeps of a moment that was meant to end something and didn't. There is a sentence in the Bible that God speaks before any wound has happened. He speaks it into the air of a garden, 11 lines after the beginning of human failure, before any prophet existed, before any nation existed, before any law was written. He announces in advance a wound that has not yet occurred, and where it will land, and what it will do, and what it will undo. And the early Christians, reading this sentence 4,000 years after it was spoken, called it the Protoevangelium. Protos means first. Evangelium means gospel, good news. They were not calling it a punishment. They were calling it the first announcement that something is coming to set right what just went wrong. The first gospel, spoken in a garden, before any disciple had been called, before any sermon had been preached, before the cross existed. And the strange thing, the thing that will not let go of anyone who looks closely enough, is that there is a detail in this sentence that almost nobody has stopped at. A word used twice in the same verse, once for what the serpent will do, and once for what the offspring will do. The same word. And once you see what that means, the cross is going to look different to you than it did before. Hold on to the scar. We are coming back to it. Genesis chapter 1 and 2 paint a world the Hebrew text describes with the word tov, good. Not pleasant, not comfortable, but structurally aligned. Everything in right relationship to everything else. A garden, 2 people. A God who walks among them and speaks to them directly. No barrier, no distance, no hiding. And then, chapter 3. A serpent enters. And what it does is not violent, and that is the first thing to notice. It does not strike, it does not destroy. It asks a question. Did God really say? That is the opening move. A question designed to introduce the possibility that what God said cannot be fully trusted. That something is being withheld. That the picture the human beings have of who God is might be incomplete or deliberately distorted. The woman takes the fruit. The man eats. And something that had never existed in this world enters human experience. Shame, hiding, fear of the God who walked with them in the cool of the day. They cover themselves. They conceal themselves in the trees. God comes into the garden and asks, "Where are you?" Not because he does not know, because something that had never been necessary before, a search, has now become necessary. What follows is a series of divine pronouncements. God speaks to the serpent first, and what he says, before he says anything to the woman or the man, is the verse this entire video is going to examine. Genesis 3:15. Most English translations read something like this: I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. 4 lines, simple structure, a declaration of conflict with an outcome already named. And hidden inside those 4 lines is an architecture that runs through every book in the Bible, all the way to the last chapter of the last book. Start with the first word that matters, enmity. The Hebrew word is eba, and it appears only 5 times in the entire Hebrew Bible. Every time it appears, it marks a conflict that is irreconcilable, a rupture that cannot be mended from the inside. God is not describing a natural antipathy between creatures. He is initiating something. He puts the enmity. It is his active choice, not a passive description. He is declaring war, and he is declaring it between the serpent and the woman, and between their respective lines of descendants stretching forward through time. Now the second word that matters, offspring, or in the original Hebrew, zerah. And this is where the sentence does something almost no English translation can carry. Zerah means seed, in the agricultural sense, but also in the biological sense, and zerah is singular, not descendants, plural, not offspring, plural, seed, one. Now, Hebrew has ways of using a singular word to mean a collective. You can say the seed of Abraham, meaning the entire nation of Israel. Zerah can function that way, but it can also narrow. It can zoom in across generations until the collective resolves into one specific individual within the line. And that tension, the word that could mean many but could mean one, turns out to be exactly what the rest of the Bible does with this promise. Paul, writing in his letter to the Galatians, makes what looks like a fine grammatical observation. He says that when God made the covenant with Abraham, he used the singular. Not to your seeds, as referring to many, but to your seed, as referring to one. And Paul draws a conclusion from that grammatical precision. The promise was always pointing at a single person, not a movement, not a nation, not a succession of kings. One. That is what Genesis 3:15 is setting in motion. A singular seed of a woman coming. The lineage narrowing across generations until someone arrives who bears the full weight of what was declared in this sentence. But there is something in this verse that neither the competitor you may have watched, nor most sermons you have ever heard will have stopped at, and it is the thing that changes everything. The Hebrew word translated crush in most English Bibles is she'uf, and God uses it twice in Genesis 3:15, once for what the offspring of the woman will do to the serpent's head, and once for what the serpent will do to the offspring's heel. The same Hebrew word used in both directions in the same sentence. This is not a translation accident. The writers of the Hebrew text chose words with extraordinary precision, and when the same word appears twice in one verse doing opposite things to different subjects, it is deliberate. The text is not describing 2 different kinds of damage with 2 different weapons. It is describing the same blow landing in 2 places against 2 different opponents with 2 different outcomes. The serpent strikes, the offspring crushes, and the instrument of the striking and the instrument of the crushing are described with the same word, as if the blow that falls on the heel is the same blow turned around that falls on the head, as if the weapon the serpent uses becomes, in the very using of it, the thing that defeats the serpent. The ancient readers noticed this. The rabbis who wrestled with this text for centuries did not miss the double use of she'uf. They saw a deliberate symmetry written into the verse, a blow answered by the same blow, a wound that contains within it, from the moment it is declared, the nature of its own reversal. Hold on to she'uf, because by the end of this, it is going to be the most important word you have ever seen used twice in one sentence. Jewish scholars writing centuries before the New Testament, with no Christian framework and no knowledge of Jesus, called Genesis 3:15 one of the most important passages in the Torah. They were not reading it as a snake story. They were reading it as a promise about something coming, a figure descending from the woman's line who would end the conflict. They called this figure the Messiah. And they understood the verse to mean that whatever this figure would do, it would involve being wounded. And the wound would be how the victory happened, not despite it. Christian writers took this framework and named it explicitly. Irenaeus, writing in the 2nd century, called Genesis 3:15 the Protoevangelium, the first gospel. Because in his reading, the moment God said the seed of the woman will crush the serpent's head, he was announcing, in the most compressed form possible, the entire story of redemption. The woman, her offspring, the wound, and the victory through the wound. Now watch what happens across the centuries between the sentence and its fulfillment. If Genesis 3:15 announces the coming of one specific seed who will crush the serpent's head, then the obvious countermove for the serpent is to destroy the seed before it arrives. And something very much like that appears again and again in the centuries that follow. The lineage narrows to one family, then one nation, then one tribe, then one dynasty. And at almost every narrowing, an attempt to end the line before it produces what was promised. Pharaoh orders the death of every Hebrew male infant. One infant survives in a basket of reeds, floated down the very river meant to kill him. The lineage of the promise passes through an ark to survive a flood, through a basket to survive a massacre, through a pit to survive treachery, through a wilderness to survive slavery, through exile to survive an empire. A man named Joseph, thrown into a pit by his brothers, sold to slave traders, imprisoned on false charges, forgotten by the person he helped, sits in an Egyptian dungeon for years, while the lineage of the promise waits on his survival. A king named David, already anointed by the prophet Samuel, already chosen to inherit the throne, spends years hiding in limestone caves in the wilderness of Judah, hunted by the very king he is destined to replace, the promise narrowing to a fugitive writing psalms in the dark. An entire nation, already the people of the covenant, chained and marched 900 miles to Babylon, their city burned, their temple destroyed, every external indicator of the promise appearing to have failed. Again and again, the same pattern. Attack, near extinction, survival. Attack, near extinction, survival. But here is the thing that matters about the pattern. In almost every case, the survival came not simply despite the attack, it came through it. Joseph's brothers throwing him into a pit was the very thing that placed him in Egypt to save them. Moses floating down the Nile was the very thing that placed him inside Pharaoh's household. The exile to Babylon was the very thing that forced the people to preserve and transmit the written text in synagogues, the same text we are reading today. The attack designed to end the promise became the mechanism by which the promise survived and spread. The prophets begin to describe a figure in terms that make no sense for a conquering king, but begin to make sense if you are holding Genesis 3:15. Isaiah, 700 years before the New Testament, describes a servant who is wounded and crushed and cut off from the land of the living. And then, on the other side of that death, he sees something that should be impossible. The servant sees his offspring, Zerah, again. After being killed, there is seed, the same word, on the other side of death. Isaiah is not inventing something new. He is seeing the specific figure Genesis 3:15 described, the one who will be struck in the heel and yet produce offspring. Micah says the ruler of Israel will come from Bethlehem, but then adds a phrase that stops anyone who reads it carefully. His origins are from of old, from ancient times. Some translations say, from the days of eternity. That is a strange thing to say about a future human king. It implies the one who will fulfill Genesis 3:15 did not begin in Bethlehem. He enters history there, but his origin is before history began. And then, silence. After the last Old Testament prophet, the prophetic voice stops for 400 years. The known world changes hands from Persia to Greece to Rome. No new word, no angel, no announcement. 400 years of the promise held in memory and text and hope without any visible movement. And then, in a small room in Nazareth, to a young woman named Mary, an angel says something that echoes Genesis 3:15 more precisely than any other sentence spoken in 400 years of silence. You will conceive and give birth to a son, the seed of a woman, the singular Zerah, after everything. If you have been keeping track of the pattern, subscribe before we get to the place where it all finally lands, because this is where it gets to the thing that has been building since the first line of this. Leave a word in the comments, shuf, or Protoevangelium, or whatever from this has landed for you, or write what you thought was the end of something that turned out to be the planting of something else. I read every one of those. Now come to the garden. Not the garden of Genesis, a different garden, Gethsemane, the night before the crucifixion. Jesus is on the ground asking for another way. He knows exactly what is coming because he has known since before any of this began. He knows the heel is about to be struck. The next morning he is arrested, tried, handed over to Rome, beaten, and nailed to a cross outside Jerusalem. At 3 p.m, he cries out in the opening words of Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And then he dies. His disciples, who spent 3 years watching him heal the sick and raise the dead, are locked in a room terrified. The women who followed him from Galilee watch from a distance. From the outside, looking at this moment with no knowledge of Genesis 3:15, it looks like exactly what the serpent intended. The seed of the woman is dead. The head of the line is gone. The attack that has been running for 4,000 years has finally worked. And here is where the shuf detonates. Because the serpent was not thinking about what happens next. The serpent was thinking about power the way power always works. Destroy the individual and the line stops. Win. But what God declared in Genesis 3:15 does not work that way. The wound in the heel is not the end of the seed. The wound in the heel is the planting of it. 3 days later, the tomb is empty. Not because the body was moved, because the one who was dead is no longer dead. And in the weeks that follow, he appears to the people who loved him in a body that bears something specific. He still has the scars. When Thomas says he will not believe unless he sees and touches the wounds, Jesus comes to him and shows him the hands. Not healed clean, not restored to the way they looked before. Scarred. The wounds that the cross left are still there, recognizable, tangible, the marks of the heel strike. And Thomas falls on his knees and says something no Jewish man had ever said to another human being before. My Lord and my God. The scars are kept on purpose. They are the evidence of what Genesis 3:15 declared. Both things at once, in the same body, in the same afternoon. The heel was struck. The head was crushed. The same shoof turned back on the one who used it. The serpent struck the offspring of the woman, and in the striking, death was used against death. The wound became the mechanism of the victory. The very thing the attack was designed to prevent, the multiplication of the seed to the ends of the earth, was accomplished through the attack. The cross that was supposed to end the line became the thing from which the line spread to every nation and every century that has followed. Now open the last book of the Bible. Revelation is often treated as the strangest, most confusing book in the canon. But if you come to it having started in Genesis and held Genesis 3:15, Revelation is almost startlingly legible. Because it is not introducing something new. It is showing you the conclusion of what Genesis 3:15 started. Revelation chapter 12. A woman clothed with the sun, the moon beneath her feet, a crown of 12 stars. She is pregnant and in labor, and standing before her is a great red dragon waiting to devour the child the moment it is born. You recognize the scene. The woman, the offspring, the serpent now grown to a dragon after 4,000 years of failed attacks, still doing the same thing, still trying to destroy the seed before it can do what was promised. But the child is born and caught up to God. The dragon cannot reach him. The same pattern on a cosmic scale at the end of time. And then Revelation chapters 21 and 22. The scene in Eden is being systematically reversed. In Genesis 3, the people are driven from the garden. The tree of life is sealed off. God's presence becomes inaccessible behind the cherubim and the flaming sword. In Revelation 22, the tree of life is back, growing in the middle of the city, its leaves for the healing of the nations. In Genesis 3, they hide from him. In Revelation 21, he is dwelling with them. The distance is gone. The hiding is gone. And 4 words that carry the weight of everything. Revelation 22, verse 3. No longer will there be any curse. No longer. The curse spoken in Genesis 3, the one that immediately followed the sentence that promised its undoing, reversed, permanently, gone. The head of the serpent crushed at last. And the serpent itself, the one who asked, "Did God really say?" in the garden, bound and thrown into the lake of fire. Genesis chapter 3, Revelation chapter 20. The first book, the last book, the same story ended. Go back to the scar, the one on your body with a specific story, what attacked you and did not finish the job. Maybe you know the date it happened. Maybe the story attached to it is one you have told so many times it has become clean and manageable, a past tense thing you survived and moved on from. Maybe it is not clean at all, and you have never told the whole of it to anyone. Maybe the scar is not on your skin. Maybe it is in a marriage, or a career, or a faith, or a friendship, or a season that ended in a way you did not choose and have never fully made peace with. The place where something attacked you and left a mark that is still there if you press on it. The pattern of 4,000 years says something about that scar. Not that the attack didn't hurt, it did. Not that the wound wasn't real, it was. But the pattern that runs from Genesis 3 to Revelation 22 says that the attack and the victory sometimes use the same mechanism. The thing that was supposed to end the line is the thing through which the line spread. The same shoof turned around. Your wound may not be the proof the enemy won. It may be the planting. Not every wound ends the way the cross did. The pattern does not promise you that nothing will ever fully land. But the God who spoke Genesis 3:15 before any wound had happened, and then let the wound come anyway, and then turned the weapon of the wounding back on the one who struck it, that God is the one standing beside you, looking at whatever mark has been left on your life and saying, I saw the shoof coming before it landed, and I know what comes through it. Not around it, through it. He kept the scars. He could have returned without them, and Thomas would not have known the difference. But he kept them, tangible, touchable, the marks of the heel strike still visible on the other side of the crushing. Because the scars are the evidence, the most particular and specific evidence available, that Genesis 3:15 was not a reactive promise spoken in the shock of the fall. It was a declaration made by someone who had already written what comes through the wound before the wound had happened. The first gospel, spoken in a garden, fulfilled in a garden tomb. And the scar is still there if you want to touch it. I'm Daniel Marsh, and this has been Scripture Unfolded, where we slow down and sit with the parts of Scripture most people read straight past until they finally say what they've been trying to say all along. If you haven't yet, subscribe. There is a new one of these every week. If a face came to mind while I was talking, someone carrying a wound they are not sure is survivable, send them this. Tell them the first sentence God spoke after the fall was not a punishment, it was a promise. Tell them the same blow falls in both directions. He put enmity between the serpent and the woman. He announced the wound before it arrived. He kept the scars after it healed. No longer will there be any curse. We'll keep walking together.